So Lynn, I believe we're ready anytime you are.
Okay, thanks, Dan. And thank you to all of you for joining me for this presentation. Let me give you some background on how I got started with citizenship preparation. I started running my library literacy program 35 years ago, and the first students I had here were Cambodian refugees. And they were very anxious to become citizens in order to sponsor family members for green cards to get them out of dangerous situations. So most of them had little or no formal education. Some had disabilities, many of them were older, and most of them were at very low proficiency levels in English. And I didn't want to tell anybody, no, citizenship is not going to be possible for you. So I went about trying to find ways to make it possible. And that has shaped my thinking all these years. I've learned a few tricks along the way that I'm going to share with you today. But if I were to put this whole presentation into a nutshell, it would be this. Instead of saying no, find a way to say yes. So I want to start by sharing my thinking about how to use time and energy most efficiently. I have found that students who are at higher proficiency levels, students who have some secondary level education and no test anxiety issues, usually younger, more confident students, these folks are likely to pass the test on their own. I give them application and test information, study questions, and I encourage them to self-prepare. I offer them a practice interview if they want one, and they almost always do fine without too much attention from me. The students I want to work with more closely are the ones with limited formal education, the elderly, those with disabilities or test anxiety, because that's where I can make a big difference. These students, and I call them at-risk students, are probably not going to pass the test without some help. So I suggest that programs put most of their time and energy into these at-risk students. Now, some of the suggestions in this presentation for helping at-risk students are about service delivery models that I use, and some relate to specific instructional modifications. To begin with, what I don't do is put both types of students together in the same class. What would happen if I put young, proficient, well-educated students in a class with the at-risk students? The more capable students will breeze along, and the students who are at lower proficiency levels will get more and more intimidated. If I stop to give them the help that they need, then the fast-track students will get bored and feel like they're wasting their time. I can give them busy work, but really I'd rather just let them self-prepare and maybe give them their own review session or one-to-one practice interview separately from the at-risk students. This at-risk group falls along a continuum. Some of them need only a little extra help. In my experience, most students will be fine as long as I do these three things. One, I make sure that they master the content in the book, which is typically around 10 class sessions and some additional review sessions. But it might take longer with students at lower proficiency levels. Two, I make sure they have a clear idea of what they'll need to pass the test and what's going to happen at the interview. And three, I give them plenty of review and encouragement. At least some of that review should be right before their interview. So sometimes they'll have a student that's all prepped for the test, and then we end up in a holding pattern because the application takes 10 months to get processed. So by then, the student may be starting to forget what she learned many months earlier, and I need to make sure that student gets some review once the interview has been scheduled. These three things are what most at-risk students need, but there's a subset of at-risk students who require instructional modifications. Some students have special needs, and these students usually do better with one-to-one tutoring instead of group instruction, or it could be as a supplement to group instruction. This is usually true for elderly students, for students who are not literate in their native language. And at-risk students need a slower pace and a lot more review and much more overall instructional time than they'll get, for example, in a typical 12-session class. I've had students who started at very low skill levels and worked with a tutor for as long as 2 years. And in the end, they did pass. Students who have little or no formal education often need some extra hand-holding. They may not know how to organize their homework, how to fill out worksheets, or how to study independently. So in addition to teaching the content, their tutor may need to coach them on basic study skills that we commonly take for granted. With these students, it's particularly important to assign a tutor who can be patient and sympathetic about their challenges. The tutor needs to understand the student's limitations and how long it's going to take to get through the material. I will help any student who wants to become a citizen and is eligible for citizenship, but I can't be sure they'll pass unless they wait for me to give them a green light before submitting an application. So we need to work together on the timing, and it can be a tricky calculation. To do it, you need to know exactly what's on the test and how it's scored. I sometimes do a test interview to see how far along students are with test preparation and how close they are to being able to pass the test. If it looks like the student will be able to master all of the content by the time the application gets processed, I encourage them to send the application in. The real nail-biter situations happen when a new student comes in the door and tells me that he has an interview scheduled in a month, or that she has already failed a test and now she has 3 months to prepare for a retest. I can't promise miracles. And I might not have a tutor who's ready to start immediately and work intensively with that student. I've pulled it off once or twice, but I really dread that situation. Now I'm going to talk to you about something different, about some of the different overlapping categories of at-risk students, starting with older students. I find that many older students have doubts about whether they can learn English. And older beginners sometimes wonder if it's worth all the effort and time they're going to have to put in. I try to address this by pointing out older students who already have become citizens through the program. Older students are likely to have experience, physical and psychological problems. So you might need to spend some time dealing with barriers like mobility. It takes longer for them to get from place to place. Falls can be a danger. You need instructional space that's near elevators and bathrooms. There may be issues with vision or hearing that you need to resolve or accommodate somehow in your instruction. Social isolation and depression are common problems that can impact on their progress. And there may also be issues with memory due to medications, or it could be age-related cognitive decline. And this can feed into their lack of confidence in terms of learning language. I teach an English and citizenship class for pre-literate and semi-literate older students who are at very low English proficiency levels, but who would really like to become citizens. So here are the classroom modifications that have worked well for these students in my class. I work to create a community or a family of learners. So we're a team, we care about each other, we help one another, and I stress cooperation rather than competition. It's a low stress, affirming classroom environment with lots of positive reinforcement. We go at a slower pace than a typical ESL class, and I give lots of repetition, extra wait time. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, wait time, but anytime I ask a question, I expect a response from students, I will wait maybe an uncomfortable 10 seconds. And students know that I'm not going to come in and rescue them, that they actually are going to have to take a risk and try to respond to me, even though there might be a mistake in what they say. And the more I do that, the more willing the students are to begin to take risks with their speech. I use strategies for confidence building. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, because these older learners don't necessarily think that they're going to be able to learn. They may give up easily. So I notice and I applaud every small success. I try to make sure that the classroom has a consistent routine, and where possible, I get a classroom assistant to help me out. I try to line up additional support in the form of one-to-one tutors, preferably bilingual tutors who can go over the classwork and homework with them between class sessions. I have a rule about teacher talk. That's another term I don't know if you're familiar with, but my rule for myself and for anyone else who assists me in the classroom is this: I will not say anything that students are not likely to understand or at least infer the meaning of. In other words, I make sure that the only things that I say to students are things that they can reasonably guess the meaning of when I use gestures and visuals, and I can build on what they've already learned. This trick takes a lot of self-discipline and practice on my part, but it's very effective once you learn how to do it. The result is that students begin to develop confidence and listening skills, and they learn to focus carefully on what I say instead of passively waiting for someone to translate for them like they usually do. I've described a class setup here, but many of these things are also advisable for one-to-one tutoring. I've developed a scaled down citizenship test that I use for planning and assessment purposes with this group. It includes only the questions that I think low beginners can realistically master. These students are a long way off from being able to take a real citizenship test, but if becoming a citizen is a strong motivation for them to learn English, I might as well teach them beginning level English skills and demonstrate to them how these skills get them closer to becoming a citizen someday. I find that focusing on this goal really helps to keep them engaged in learning. And the document I'm talking about, this Foundations of Citizenship test, is there's a link to it that Dana's going to send you after this webinar. You're likely to run into students like the ones in my class who are at the very beginning stages of learning English. And their level is really too low for a standard citizenship class. But if they resist the idea of spending a year or two in a broadly focused beginning level class, and particularly if it's an academic workforce development focus, in this situation, you could think about offering a practical beginning level ESL instruction with a strong focus on citizenship preparation. I'm going to share a handout. This also, Dan is going to send you this one that I have developed just for this purpose. If you look on the left side, it identifies beginning level vocabulary and skills that relate directly to the citizenship test. And on the right, I've listed related content that we normally teach to beginners. So between the two, you have curriculum for what you could call a pre-beginning citizenship class. I should also mention that if you have beginning literacy students in your program, you might want to try my literacy skills workbook, that's the blue book, to help them prepare for the literacy component of the citizenship test. It starts with the ABCs, simple sight words, and gradually works up to full sentence dictations. Sometimes I run into students who have cognitive issues but can't get a disability waiver, and I'm going to tell you more about disability waivers in a minute. Often the problems are undiagnosed, undocumented, even unacknowledged, and they may not be severe enough to justify a disability waiver. The problems are often related to memory, and they could be caused by strong medications, it might be age-related, or it could be something the student was born with. Cognitive issues come up more often with refugees because so many of them have experienced torture, brain injuries, starvation, and trauma. Ideally, they get a doctor to fill out a disability waiver request. But if this isn't possible for one reason or another, I don't want to tell a student, no, you can't become a citizen. Instead, I try to find instructional modifications for that student. And they're really the same modifications I suggested earlier. Individualized instruction with a patient tutor, longer instructional time with a slower pace, frequent review, and lots of encouragement. Just about all students struggle with test anxiety to some degree when it comes to the citizenship test. It's a high-stakes test, and it can have life-changing consequences for students. And many students, especially the ones who come from countries with repressive governments, they've learned to fear interactions with public officials, or they may have had difficult experiences with testing in school when they were young. This is not an easy thing to unlearn. Even if a student has a rational, understands on a rational level that the examiner is not going to hurt them, they don't really believe it on an emotional level. They don't have control over this anxiety. I had a student who, when he was younger in school, was hit every time he made a mistake. And even many years later, he still had a lot of anxiety about testing. So his tutor was very patient with him, and he was able to perform okay on practice interviews, but when he got to his actual interview, he froze up and he wasn't able to perform. And we were very lucky that time because the examiner gave him a timeout and let him sit by himself for a little while just to calm down. And when the examiner came back, he was able to finish the test. But since there's really no way around this test, students have to be ready to perform even under stress. So they may need to over-prepare so that they can perform almost on an automatic level. So I might go over test questions with a student and tell her, I think you're ready for the interview. And she'll tell me, no, I'm not. So we'll just keep on practicing. I offer as much practice as my students feel that they need. I also work pretty hard to mitigate anxiety. I remind students that perfect grammar and pronunciation are not necessary to pass this test. I point out that low-level students have already passed the test, and they may know some of those students. I reassure students that examiners are generally fair, and I remind them that they get a second chance interview for free. So if it helps, they can regard that first interview as something like a dress rehearsal. Practice interviews give students a really clear idea of what they will encounter and how well they'll be able to perform. And I find that a practice interview can go a long way to helping a student sleep the night before the real one. There are some exceptions to the English part of the test for older students. They're pretty narrow and not too many of my students can qualify for them. But this is how it works. On the date that they apply for citizenship, if a student has been a permanent resident for 15 years and is over 55, they're able to skip the English test. And the same thing is true for students who have been permanent residents for more than 20 years and are over 50. Now they still have to take the civics test, but they can do it with a translator. Additionally, students who have been permanent residents for 20 years at the time that they apply and are over 65, they have a shorter list of questions that they can study. Now, for all of these exceptions, the students don't have to go through any special process to qualify for them. This is actually part of the N400 application. They just check off a box as they're filling that out. If you have trouble remembering all these numbers like I do, just look at part 2 of the N400 application or look on the details of the USCIS website. Applicants can request a test modification if they have a disability, and I mentioned this earlier, that gets in the way of taking a normal test. So for example, they can ask for large print or Braille or a sign language interpreter. And this again is something the applicants can request right on the N400. I mentioned disability waivers earlier. If an applicant has a disability that is so severe that they can't take a test at all, they can apply for a disability waiver. This form is called an N648, and it has to be filled out with care by a doctor or a psychologist, and it gets submitted along with the N400 application for citizenship. There's a USCIS regulation that not too many people are familiar with, and it says that in selecting civics test questions, the officer must take into consideration factors such as the applicant's education, background, age, length of residence in the US, and opportunities available, and efforts made to acquire the language. Examiners have special sets of questions with special situations like this, but how's the officer going to know that your student has special circumstances like this to consider? I document these factors in a student's background that I think deserves due consideration, and I put them on program letterhead, and I have students bring it to their interview. I use the same general outline for every due consideration letter, but the bullet points are specific to this particular student. If you want a sample discretion letter like this, contact me and I will send you one. Will the examiner look at it? You know, I really hope so, but I never know for sure. But my students do pass their tests. So for the next part of this webinar, I want to show you some instructional strategies that are useful for all students, but particularly those at-risk students. There's a tendency to focus on those 100 civics questions as if that was the whole test. But as you probably know, there are 4 components to the test. Which ones are the students failing most often? Well, you can see here. And why? I think the reason is because the 100 civics questions are available to students and they will study them obsessively, but they don't have the sentences that are used for the reading and writing test. USCIS only gives out a vocabulary word list, and a lot of students don't even know that exists. But you can find the actual reading and writing sentences on page 176 and 177 of my book. And if students know to practice these sentences, they will learn them and likely do fine on their writing test. The speaking test is another matter. The speaking test is actually the personal background interview. And that's harder to prepare for. I mean, what are the students supposed to study? There's no official vocabulary or question list. So the key is the N400 application itself. At the interview, the examiner is going to go over the student's N400 application to update it and to verify that everything on it is accurate and consistent. If students are literate in their native language, translations of these application questions can give them a head start in preparing for the interview. Even though students have to submit the official application in English, these translations can help them understand what they're going to be asked about. Then in your instruction, you'll spend less time making sure they understand the concepts and more time making sure that they recognize the vocabulary in English and can respond effectively in English. And Dan is going to share a link with you where you can find some of these translations. Examiners are required to repeat and rephrase interview questions as many times as necessary. They know how to phrase things in simple ways, but they don't always choose to, unless the applicant requests it. So it's really important for students to know that they're allowed to ask for clarification, that they're not afraid to ask for clarification. It won't prejudice them, the examiner, in any way. And they need to know how to ask for clarification. And let me explain why. There are a series of questions that follow the pattern, have you ever done this, or have you ever done that? And the students generally answer no, no, no to each question in succession. But sometimes the examiner suspects that the applicant has been coached to say no, 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 and the student is not really understanding the question. So this is a trap that students can fall into. For example, the examiner says, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? And the student says no. And then the examiner says, what is the Communist Party? And the student says, I don't know. So the examiner follows up with, why did you answer no if you didn't understand the question? And in this scenario, if the applicant is unable to define the Communist Party or some other term on the N400, the applicant fails. The student may actually know what the word means in her native language, but she doesn't know how to define it. This practice, by the way, it contradicts all of the regulations that examiners are supposed to follow, but it's happening right now in field offices all over the country. And until immigration sends out a clear policy directive to the field offices that this is not going to be allowed, we need to be proactive and show students how to defend themselves if it happens to them. So I'm going to show you how. The examiner says, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? And the student says, can you explain Communist Party? By asking for clarification, the applicant throws it back at the examiner and he is required to explain it to them. So I urge students not to answer any question that they don't really understand. Instead, they should be ready to ask for clarification. And I encourage students to arm themselves with synonyms for those tricky vocabulary words just in case. My book, Ready for the Interview, has lots of information about this and gives students practice with interview questions and clarification skills. If you want something shorter, I recommend a website called USA Hello. They have simple definitions of those tricky legal terms that students might encounter in the interview. There are also some great YouTube videos that you can find if you search under citizenship interview. And these give students a pretty good idea of what they might actually be asked in their interview. And some of them teach students how to explain tricky vocabulary words if they get challenged by the examiner. I should note that these videos are especially useful because it's important for students to hear the content rather than just read about it. If you're going to prepare students for citizenship, you should learn to give practice interviews. I give mini practice interviews in each class. I'll choose one particular N400 section, like travel history or work history. I go over the vocabulary and the typical way that questions might be phrased. And then I ask for a student volunteer. We do a short role play, and then I invite the whole class to applaud the brave student who volunteered to answer my questions. I do an individual full-length interview for each student a week or two before the actual interview. And this way I catch any potential problems that we can work on in the remaining days before the actual interview. And the student can go into the interview knowing exactly what to expect. It's a good way to build confidence and mitigate anxiety. And there's a guide for how to do this in the links that Dan is going to send you. Now I'm going to move on to another component of the citizenship test, the civics test. This is the booklet that applicants get when they go in for the fingerprint interview. Take a look and guess why I encourage students to throw it away and instead use my simplified list of questions. As you can see here, there's a lot more information than the student actually needs to be able to read and understand. It gives you a background about why the answer is the answer and tells you much more about this particular topic. But in fact, the student only needs to know the question and the answer. This brings me to my rule number 1 for teaching civics. Keep it simple. I don't want to overwhelm students with civics information. If I'm teaching beginners and my time is limited, I teach just the content that's on the test, not a fascinating and wide-reaching survey of American history and government. I can supplement with more information for advanced level students, but beginners can get overwhelmed easily and they'll lose confidence. And I'm trying to convince them that yes, you can do this. Students will be confused sometimes about which information is on the test and which information isn't. So it's crucial to make sure that this is clear to them. Here's another example of the keep it simple principle. This is a civics question that has a lot of potential answers. When the beginning level students see it, they get pretty worried. There's a lot of text here, many unfamiliar terms that are hard to decode and hard to understand and to pronounce and to remember. Do students actually need to know this whole list? No, they actually only have to name 2 cabinet level positions. So I make it easier for students by selecting the answers that I think that they're most likely to be able to remember and pronounce. In my book and in my classes, I show them only these answers instead of the whole list. If students can read their native language and at least have some formal education, they may benefit from reading translations of the civics questions and answers. Then you don't have to spend as much time on teaching the concepts. You can put more of your focus on helping students to recognize and respond to the questions in English. There are some translations available on the USCIS website. There's even more languages available on USA Hello and the clinic websites, and I'm sending you a link to all of them. When I teach civics, I don't start a lesson by having students read a passage, especially beginning level students. Instead, I always start with visuals. You can use classroom visuals or just start by talking about the visuals in a given textbook page. And these will help you make abstract ideas more concrete. They get meaning across to students even when students are at very low proficiency levels. I like to ask, what do you see here? And then I ask some follow-up questions to get students to tell me what they already know about a topic. My teacher's guide gives lots of ideas about how to make abstract concepts more concrete and how to engage prior knowledge. This means finding out what students already know about the topic and building on those ideas. One way to do this is to get students to relate something about their home countries or compare it to something in the US, or connect a civics topic to something that's familiar from their everyday lives. And if I really could do a whole presentation on just that, but if you read the teacher's guide, you can get a lot more information about that. It's a good idea to be proactive about the kinds of listening errors that get students in trouble with similar civics questions like the ones you see here. Here are some examples. I'm going to close the window so you don't have to hear the siren. Sorry about that. Here are some examples of questions that may sound alike to students. While they're trying to process the first few words that they hear in the question, the last part of the question may escape them. The teacher's guide brings these similar questions to your attention and suggests ways to help students distinguish between them and ask for clarification if necessary. I make sure that the practice I give students is authentic. In civics instruction, I use the official wording of the civics questions, not just any old civics question. For the literacy test practice, I dictate the official vocabulary for the reading and writing tests. For interview practice, I can't use the official wording of interview questions because we don't really know what they're going to be. So what we can do is stick to the specific topics that the N400 questions are about. One of my pet peeves about citizenship instruction is that novice teachers will sometimes ask students to write the answers to the oral civics questions for homework. What happens when they do this? Well, one, students think that they have to learn how to spell the answers in order to pass the test, and they may feel overwhelmed about how much they're going to need to study in order to pass. And two, they may worry more about reading and writing than they do about listening. In fact, it's an oral test, so they really only need to be able to hear the question and be able to answer it orally. It's tedious for students to memorize a long list of questions and answers. Here's another way to help students sort of program the answers to civics questions in their head: songs. So for example, there's a question that asks, what is one promise that you make when you become a citizen? And I coach students to answer, to obey the laws. So in class, we'll sing, when you become a US citizen, you promise to obey the laws, obey the laws. Here's another example. Another question asks students to name 3 of the original 13 states. So my students sing, New York, New Jersey, New Hampshire, New York, New Jersey, New Hampshire, New York, New Jersey, New Hampshire were some of the early states. There are more than 20 of these songs in my teacher's guide. So I hope that you'll try them out, and I hope you'll have some fun in your citizenship classes. This brings me to the end of my presentation, and I imagine you probably have some questions, so I'm going to have Dan feed them to me.
Yes, there are some questions. Thank you, Lynn. First of all, there were some applause images for your singing, I believe.
Thank you.
I'll just go through these questions in the order they were received. One was early on, where can I find study questions and practice interview?
Okay, so I am sending you out a guide to how to conduct a practice interview, and in there you'll see some guesses that I've taken about how the questions might be worded. But the real answer is you should go to the actual N400 and look at what information they're trying to get, and then you can try to imagine how they might ask these questions in a less legal form, in a simpler way.
Okay. One question is, how long is each class?
My classes are usually about an hour and a half.
Okay. And is there still a 10-month wait for the interview?
You know, that was just an example, and that's the kind of thing that I'm seeing lately in my area. But it can be anywhere from, I think right now, 6 to 15 months is what I heard, depending on what state you're in.
Okay. I'm going to just read this how it's written. I think there's okay, here's what it means. Do you have any strategies for teaching have you ever vocabulary? Sometimes trying to find pictures to represent those vocabulary words is difficult.
Oh, yes, it is. I should have included a slide that shows you the illustrations in Ready for the Interview, the Red Book. That takes every single question and explains what that question is about. And some of them are pretty unpleasant terms. So the way that I approach that in the book is to tell a short story about some fictional character who did this terrible thing. And that way we don't have to talk about, did you do this terrible thing?
Okay. One question was, where do you get your bilingual tutors?
I am lucky enough to live in a college town. And there are a lot of college students who grew up in bilingual households and had actually coached their own parents through the citizenship interview. So if I am patient and I try for long enough, I usually can come up with someone who speaks the native language of my student.
All right. A question from Jill. Can Lynne repeat the part about disability might not be acknowledged? They might be unaware. And she says, I missed the rest of that.
Well, what I was saying is that I have had students who it appeared to me that there was something going on cognitively, but they either couldn't get a doctor to document it, or the student himself was not aware that he had a disability going on. Maybe sometimes it's just a student who's not very quick. And I never know for sure if there's something medical going on or not. But if I can't get that student to apply for a disability waiver, then I just have to provide instruction at a slower pace with lots of review. And that's what that was all about.
All right. Boy, the questions keep coming in, so I'm going to keep trying. Here's one from Catherine. Can you clarify what you said about the 2 pages with, quote, the actual reading and writing sentences, end quote? It says,
Okay.
It was USCIS would not provide those?
No, they won't.
Possible sentences?
What USCIS provides is a list of the individual vocabulary words. So the student is going to be asked to read one sentence aloud, and actually that sentence is a question. And then they're asked to write a dictation, which happens to be the answer to the question they just read aloud. The vocabulary for those questions and answers is provided by USCIS on their website, but they don't provide the whole sentence. With a limited number of words, though, there's only so many sentences that can actually be used in this test. And so I put them together. I figured out pretty much what those sentences are, and they're printed in the book.
Okay. You're doing great with my interpretations of what these questions are. What is the website link for Hello USA that you mentioned when talking about Ready for the Interview?
We're sending it out to you. I think it's hellousa.org, and you can easily Google that, but we'll be sending you that link.
Okay, that'll be in the follow-up email, and I'll repeat that now. Everybody will receive a follow-up message by Monday, and it will contain this recording and Lynne's presentation slides and the resources that she has referenced during her presentation. So one person asked, can you share the translation link, please? Is that also a resource you provide?
Yes, that's on the list.
Okay, let me just keep going here. From Marianne, is the Communist Party tricky question typical for the examiner to focus on these at this time?
Any of those questions could be the one that trips the student up. There's a whole succession of questions about some very complex legal issues. A lot of them are human rights issues. The last things like, have you ever been involved in genocide or killing people or trading weapons, that sort of thing. And like I said, they're pretty unpleasant terms, but unfortunately we have to teach the student what they mean. So they're all listed in my book, and they're all listed at that USA Hello website that explains some of those terms so that you can coach students to define them if necessary.
And someone just asked about when the recording will be available and how I can review it. It will be sent as a link to a YouTube video, and that will come out by Monday. Others are responding to how long the wait time is in their areas: 10 months, 12 months, 13 months. Let's see, this website has PDFs. I'm just scrolling through. Are there some vocabulary words on the N400 that you think applicants are asked more or less likely to be asked? Sorry.
All of them. They're likely to be asked every single question.
Okay. A lot of people are saying great presentation. Excited to share what they've learned. I'm just reading on. Others are offering some resources of their own, which is always nice. And should the students wait? Should the student wait until they finish their citizenship prep to apply for citizenship?
I guess I need to go over that again a little better. If it looks like that student is in pretty good shape and is going to be able to master the content easily, then I tell them to go ahead and apply. If I have any doubts, I'll get them started on the curriculum, and maybe at the midpoint, I will give them a practice test to see if they can perform reasonably well in an interview. And if it looks as if I'm going to be able to get them ready for the whole thing, you know, to be completely ready by the time their application gets processed and they get their interview date, then I will tell them to go ahead. If there's any question about whether they're ready, I want to test them out first and guess whether or not they're going to be completely ready by the time the application gets processed. And what's complicated about that is it really depends on the processing time in your particular area. So around here, probably the minimum time from when they send the application to when they get their interview would be 4 or 5 months. And so that's what I'm going with, but you'd need to know a little bit better what the processing times are in your particular city.
Okay, this next question is one I can sort of answer. It says, are your materials available online? I use your materials and have for years, but now that we're remote, I don't have access to the books to get them to our tutors. And I can assure you that this pandemic and everything that has happened as a consequence has been a struggle, not just for students and teachers, but for publishers as well. And New Readers Press is in the midst of still building an e-reader platform that should be, that the plan is to have it available this fall. And the very first thing that we're going to put on there is this citizenship, these citizenship books from Lynne. And this e-reader will also be connected to an LMS, and you'll be able to track student progress and that sort of thing. That's one of the reasons it's taking us as long as it is to make the conversion. But we are working on that. We understand the need. It says, can Lynne repeat where to find definitions of words the examiner might ask, like communism?
Well, I said that you can find them in my red book, Ready for the Interview. And you can also see them on the USA Hello site that I'm sending you the link to.
All right, next question. And they're pouring in faster than I can add. So we'll just do this as long as we can. Is there a way for instructors to see an actual interview besides sample YouTube videos in order to better prepare students for what will happen?
Immigration is not putting out an actual full-length interview, but if you Google citizenship interview, one of the first links that's going to come up is to the USCIS sample interview video, which is like a very shortened version of an interview. It gives you an idea of what it looks like, but it doesn't include all of the questions. And I want to add, I said that they're in my book, Ready for the Interview, and at the USA Hello site, you can also see all of those questions on the N400 application.
Okay. Now this one is kind of like here's something that was heard. Do you agree? So Teresa says, I was told that students did not need to know N400 keywords. We were told to coach the students to ask for a manager if they were asked what does this word mean?
I think I understand what this person is asking. It's that scenario that I showed you with the captions a little bit earlier, where the examiner asks a question and the student says no, have you ever done this or have you ever done that? And then the examiner challenges the student by asking, well, what does communist mean, or what does genocide mean, or what do weapons mean? And that's what they are supposed to call a supervisor. My students aren't going to do it, but the official answer from immigration was that if this ever happens, you should ask for a supervisor.
Okay. Eileen says, I need to learn how to write a discretion letter. Some of my over 65 students have definite language processing issues and need lots of wait time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share examples of discretion letters?
Yeah, I mean, if you get in touch with me, just send me an email. I will send you a sample discretion letter. But the example that you used where there is the teacher knows that there's a cognitive problem, that's not good enough, because if you mention a specific medical issue, immigration is just going to say, get a doctor to document it on a disability waiver. So the kind of things that I am documenting on these discretion letters are specifically what it said in the statute. And I'm going to go back to what those are. Just give me a second. So the applicant's education, background, age, length of residence in the US, and opportunities available and efforts made to acquire the language. So I might say this student did not have a chance to get any formal education because she grew up during the Civil War. She came to the United States and she already was 50 years old and she had to go to work right away, that she's been working in my program for 2 years with a tutor, that maybe there was no other class available to her because she was working 50 hours a week. Those are the kind of things that you can document on your program's letterhead. You really can't get anywhere with any kind of a medical problem, because then they're going to ask for proof of it.
All right, and Glenn wants to know about publicity. How do you promote your classes, and how many students do you typically have in a class?
Actually, I have to be honest with you. This is a fairly low incidence program. I may get 10 or 12 students a year for citizenship. Mostly word gets out by word of mouth, through other adult education programs, through some of the students' employers. And we've been around for so long that sometimes these people have been sponsored by other immigrants in the past who were my students many years ago. And when their relatives arrive here, the first thing they do is bring them to the library to sign them up for a tutor. I will admit it's much, much harder to do during the pandemic. My building is closed down and we're trying to do everything remotely right now. And I do still have a few citizenship students, but the outreach is really a pretty difficult part of it. Did I miss any part of that question?
I don't know. I've already rolled. Oh, it's just about how do you promote your program. But you mentioned a remote instruction. And the next question is, how are you coping with online instruction and your textbook resources?
So I do have tutors and students who are working remotely, and they each have to have a copy of the book. How am I coping? I gotta admit that class for the elderly students just wasn't going to fly remotely. I couldn't get these elderly students online. So the class has been on hiatus. I have bilingual tutors who are working on reviewing the material with the students, in many cases just by phone. And I'm happy to announce that in a couple of weeks, the library is going to reopen, and the first public programming we're going to have is that class for the elderly.
Okay, and how important is teaching small talk?
It is important, and I'll tell you why. Because the first thing that happens is the examiner is going to invite the student into a room, or more likely it'll be more a setup in a large space during COVID times. But in any case, the student, their name is going to be called. They're going to be asked to come to the examiner's desk, wherever that is. They're going to be told to raise their right hand and promise to tell the truth, and then sit down. And so that's what I do in every practice interview. We go through those steps. And then oftentimes the examiner will ask a couple of questions that are not related to the citizenship test, but are really a way of gauging how well the student is doing in English. So they might ask, why are you here today? Or did you have any trouble finding the office? Or how's the weather outside? Or something along those lines. And when the student answers, then the examiner has an idea of, whether they can just ask the questions very quickly using the same legal language that's on the N400, or whether they're going to have to scale it down a little bit and ask the questions in a way that is more accessible to limited English speakers. They're trained to do this, and that's the reason why there's a little bit of small talk in the beginning, but we don't know what question they're going to ask. So I've just given you an example of some of the typical ones, and you can maybe think of some of your own.
Okay. And Bevan says, we've coached our volunteer tutors not to help with the application because we're not in the position to give legal advice. How do you handle coaching on the application?
It depends on what you mean by coaching. We also can't tell students what to write in their application. Filling out applications for students or advising them how to fill it out is kind of risky business for an adult literacy program. But if you're talking about practicing for the interview, you want to use a copy of the student's application if you can, so that you can refer to it when you're asking those questions. For example, a question might ask, what is your current residence? But the examiner is more likely to say, your application says you live at 100 Main Street. Is that still true? That you can do, and you should do. That's the only way that the student is going to be able to prepare.
Okay. Do you have any advice about meeting integration assimilation goals required by funders?
I didn't understand.
Okay. It says required by funders such as USCIS. Does that help?
So there is some funding available from USCIS that is related to civic integration, or assimilation is the word they were using before. Yes, but that's a whole different presentation. Generally speaking, that's what I'm doing with this group of elderly students, and it just means helping them to become more integrated in the community, knowing what community resources there are, what their rights and responsibilities are in the community, what sort of roles are expected of them as parents and employees, as citizens and neighbors. I'm not sure if that's what this question was about, but that's the best I can do in a couple of minutes.
Okay. And Andrew says, are you saying that applicants are likely to be asked to define every single term on the N400?
No, I'm not. I think it's a trick that examiners use. They shouldn't use it, but every now and then, if it looks as if the student is answering kind of too automatically, if they have any doubts about whether the student really understands the question, that's when they turn around and ask the student to define the word. They shouldn't do it, but they do it.
All right, next, what's the process for appeal when a student fails the test twice?
You need to ask one of the legal immigration rights groups to help out with that sort of thing. I don't know of anybody who has succeeded in appealing on their own. You pretty much need a lawyer to help you with that.
Will there be an updated version of your citizenship and literacy book?
Not unless it's a new test. There was a new test, but it was rescinded before most people had to take it. And now we're working with the same test that we have been since around 2008. I'm not hearing about any changes to the citizenship test anywhere in the near future, but if there should be any changes, we will come up with a new edition for sure.
Okay. I've no personal experience conducting practice interviews. Can watching YouTube videos help prepare me, or is there another source?
I think that would be a very good way to help prepare you. I'm also sending you a guide that'll talk you through these steps that I mentioned earlier. And you can also use my book, the Red Book, Ready for the Interview, and that tells you everything you need to know about practice interviews.
Right, and someone said, sorry, I missed the beginning. Is the written part of the test usually much before the oral part?
No, almost everything is oral in a citizenship interview. But at some point, they're going to ask the student to read one sentence and write one sentence. Probably somewhere in the middle of all of that. And that's all. There was no other written part of the test.
And I think here someone is trying to offer some additional information related to the integration assimilation. Earlier. It says many citizenship programs have to have integration assimilation outcomes. Do you have any approaches or insight about these types of goals? Our program includes guest speakers and visits when possible, but it can be challenging to balance.
I'm a little confused about the question. Is this a program that is receiving USCIS citizenship and integration money?
I don't know. I'll maybe they'll respond with some more information. Somebody regarding the medical disability waiver, has there been increased research among clinical psychologists in determining medical disability in older limited literacy learners? If so, where can we find those standards?
I don't know if there's any overlap between literacy education and the medical conditions. The doctor knows doctor stuff, and we know education. In order to get this N648 disability waiver, a doctor has to show evidence that this student has a medical disability. They have to name what test they use in order to arrive at that diagnosis, and tell how long it's likely to last. And there's a whole lot of other questions involved, but none of them relate to what we're dealing with ability to learn particular aspects of literacy. No.
Are you familiar with the Smithsonian videos preparing for the oath? And if so, what do you think about those?
I'm not very familiar with them. I think that when I reviewed them, I found that they were appropriate to higher level students, and I tend to work with lower level students. But I don't really remember, so I shouldn't even take a shot at that question.
Okay. Do you test English level with BEST or CASAS or something else?
I actually am not mandated to do that by any state agency. And so I do my own informal assessment, and that usually takes the form of getting the background information that I would need from a student anyway. So it's asking about the student's name and address and phone number, what they did in their country, how many years of education they have, what language they speak, asking them questions about their schedule. And in the process, I get a pretty good idea of where that student is. If I'm using a particular textbook series for ESL, some of those have informal placement tests that I can use as well. There's another part of that question. So like for my elderly students, these students are very, very, very low proficiency levels. And so I will just ask them, what is your name? How do you spell it? Where are you from? How old are you? If they can't answer those questions, then I screen them into my class. And then the rest of the intake I do with the translator. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's how I do the assessment here.
Okay. One person said, is biometrics still required for citizenship?
Yes, it is. That is what is causing this big backlog, because it's really hard to do during a pandemic. You have to get close to someone to take their fingerprints. And what's going on right now is that immigration is trying to dig through the applicant's prior applications. So if they have a green card application with a photo and fingerprints that are good enough, they'll skip that biometrics appointment and just use that for citizenship. But apparently, a lot of people don't have the biometrics that they want, and they're going to have to go in and actually get the fingerprints done. And that's taking a really long time to schedule. But yeah, everybody has to go in for an appointment. If they're not digging it out of your green card application.
All right, I'm going to ask one last question here. I can't possibly get to all of them. Show something to answer another question, and then I'm going to promise to go through all of the questions and create. If Lynn might be able to help at some point, create a document to respond to the other questions that I could then later share, just through email with people or something. I'll try to find a way to answer the rest of the questions. But here's one. Pam says, I just took over a program and I want to know your thoughts on an ELL's length of language acquisition before successfully being able to pass the interview.
So the test is supposed to be aimed at the high beginning NRS level. If the student is below that, then you're going to have to spend a lot of time working on English proficiency in addition to working on those civics questions.
Okay, now I am going to show this screen here because it relates to a question somebody asked about the audio, and we recently updated our website, and I'm here. If you just go to newreaderspress.com, actually maybe I should start over. I've got to move the toolbar. If you just go to newreaderspress.com, and then when you're there, if you look at the top up here, we have ESL Citizenship. And if you want to, you can go over here and click on Citizenship. It'll take you to the page we were just looking at, where you can just see the titles. But if you actually click, like here's the civics and literacy. If you actually click on it, you're going to be able to scroll down, see details. And if there are additional resources, they're available here. And it'll say, okay, well, here's some literacy audio. So somebody asked if we would make the audio available online. Well, it's not available online in terms of a player, but you can download it. And once you download it, you can play it on your computer. So, I mean, the audio is there. I hope that helps to answer that question. And there are so many others we didn't get to. We're past time. Thank you for hanging around. We still have over 150 people online. And Lynn, I really appreciate your taking time to put this together for us. And I'll send you the rest of the unanswered questions, and we'll see if we can't come up with some answers, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.